And everybody around town knows Scott Peters. He's a former city council member. He's a current member of Congress, representing CA 52, the 52nd Congressional District. Mr. Peters, Darren Smith, Jack Cronin, thank you very much for joining us on News Radio 600 KOGO.
Thanks for having me. By the way, I just want to say, since you were talking about it, that San Diegans who complain about the weather, no, just stop.
Yeah.
Just stop.
Yep.
I was looking at my phone. It's 6:30 in Washington, D.C., and it's 87 degrees. So, we can deal with 80 in the middle of the day.
Absolutely, especially in the months where it's supposed to be a little bit warmer. But you were listening also as we were getting rolling here, and I don't know if you want to chime in on the airport or just about the status of ride sharing, but we left a lot for you there. So if you want to just take it in any direction, go ahead.
I'm a big customer at the airport. I want to say that you remember that in 2006, I think the voters voted 70% to keep the airport where it was and not try to move to Miramar. So the region committed to investing in Terminal 2 first, and it came out great. I'm really proud of the airport. I think it works great. Terminal 1 it really needs some help, and I'm glad the confidence you guys expressed in it getting done. But what's holding that up, by the way, because you were talking about it, is people objected to the initial plan because it didn't really have a way to get people to and from public transit to the airport, and I think that's going to be solved, and I think that's going to be a big part of the solution.
All right, what about the second part of that, which is the status of the rideshare industry or the gig economy, if you will?
Well, I think it's going to be around to stay. I think there's a general sense in California that people should be paid a fair wage, and I think what you're seeing out of Sacramento is a concern that that's not happening, and an effort to make sure that that they don't get the short end of the stick. So I think that's how it's going to play out here. I know that Uber and Lyft will have their say too, but this legislation that's about to pass, I think, is going to help those drivers.
Well, in San Diego too, I know you've been part of this. You're looking at the future of travel just in general, the self-driving cars and the testing grounds we have here, and the uses for military and law enforcement and those kind of things. The technology that we're moving towards when it comes to the airport or anywhere else is going to be changing rather rapidly.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with. And I think that's one of the challenges for transportation planning is making sure you're planning for 10 years ahead, not 10 years ago. And you should keep an eye on the new director at Sandag, who's Hassan Ikrada out of L.A. He's thrown some punches early about changing up the way people move around here, and he's being pretty aggressive. It's new to San Diego. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Where do we find you today, by the way, Mr. Peters? In D.C., or are you in San Diego?
I am in lovely San Diego, California, in my district office, which is near the UTC Mall.
Love that. Wow, there's a lot of stuff happening around the UTC Mall, huh? Looks a lot different than it did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we're building the biggest infrastructure project in the history of the San Diego County, the trolley extension up to UTC and UCSD, which is, by the way, half a federal project and half paid for by the taxpayers who voted for the half-cent sales tax extension back in 2004, if you can believe it.
Well, and you mentioned the airport, too. I mean, the airport is going to be along those same lines as far as these big infrastructure programs go. I think
that Terminal 2 was almost $2 billion.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and again, as you look at the future, when it comes to things like this, you mentioned Sandag, are we on the right track in your mind as it comes to some of these big, grand ideas?
So San Diego's got good problems. People aren't disinvesting in San Diego. We've got a great future. People want to live here. We've got a great talent base, and we're going to grow. But that puts a lot of strain on the existing infrastructure. So if you thought about building out our future with a million more people by 2030, and they're all going to be in single occupancy vehicles, that's going to be challenging for us. So I think the idea of moving people around in a different way and connecting that with new housing makes a lot of sense.
It's interesting because I think on our very first show, if I'm not mistaken, we talked a little bit about the use of mass transit in our city. And, it's one thing to build it. I mean, and anybody who's driven through UTC recently or anybody who's driven up and down the 5 recently has certainly seen the infrastructure being put into place. But my question would be more about the mindset of being somebody who uses mass transit and how we convince people. As you said, 1 million more people expected in town by 2030. That's a lot.
Yeah.
How do we convince people who maybe otherwise never considered the use of mass transit? How do we convince them that it's a good idea for everybody, for all of us?
Yeah. Well, it's, look, you have to consider it as competing against the automobile. So, we're not going to order people to get out of their cars. We're going to build a system that's attractive enough to them that they'll say, this is a better way for me to get from A to B. Now, it's easy in a place like Washington, D.C. to build underground trains where everything's already dense, there's not enough parking. It's a logical thing to do. I went to law school with a woman in New York City from a place I'd never heard of, La Jolla, California. And she took the subway because that was a logical thing to do in New York City. Right now, we haven't built that system yet. But part of it is giving some attention to making sure you're putting origins and destinations, workplaces, and homes on that line. So far, we have to do a better job of that, because if you're going to a game at Petco, for instance, it might be a good choice to avoid all that traffic going downtown. But it's hard to see our system being comprehensive enough yet to take care of all your daily trips. And that's what we have to do. As we build out, we have to compete against the automobile and position the trains and the uses and housing around that system so that people want to use it.
We're talking with Scott Peters on News Radio 600 KOGO. You mentioned it earlier. You are part of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. For those those people out there listening who don't know what that is, or those talking to you right now, what exactly is that a little bit? Tell us a little bit more about what that is and what it means to serve on that committee.
Sure. So every member of Congress is assigned to committees that are subject specific. So my first committee assignment when I came in was to the Armed Services Committee, which makes sense. We did the defense budget every year. Good assignment for San Diego. I've been on the Veterans Affairs Committee, where we talk about veterans issues. I've been on the Budget Committee. I've been trying to get on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is one of the committees with big jurisdiction across the economy. So we cover energy, healthcare, telecommunications, environment and climate. Really, it's one of the most important committees, I think most people would tell you. And I've been trying to get on. I tried to get on it for a while. In my third term, I was appointed to that committee, and so that's my job. So part of my job every week is to go to my committee meetings and work on specific legislation in those areas that ultimately, if we pass it out of the committee, will get to the House floor and we hope become law.
Wow, those sound like pretty minor topics there. I don't know why you would spend so much time trying to get on and discuss these sort of things. For those of us who live in Southern California, we hear a lot, and I think people are climate-wise, they are constantly thinking environmentally. I mean, that's one of the reasons certainly that living in Southern California appeals to me. Just for us here, because I think everybody now, whether we're following what's going on with the hurricane, people are always wondering, what is the impact of the changing environment on me? So what are what are the things that people need to be concerned with here as it revolves around the economy?
So in
the environment, excuse me.
In 2010, we did some research on the effect of climate change on San Diego. I was chair of something called the Climate Initiative that was sponsored by the San Diego Foundation that was meant to give local decision makers good information about climate. We engaged some scientists that told us that the three big effects of climate change in San Diego are more intense wildfires, which we've seen, sea level rise, which would make sense to you, and then throughout California, we're expecting to see more extended droughts over time that will put pressure on our water supplies. And those are the effects, I think, mostly in San Diego. Their larger effects is, nationwide and worldwide, is also involves food supply. We have to be concerned about making sure that people can grow the kind of food we're used to eating, and but that's not necessarily an agricultural concern directly relevant to this particular district.
Now, I know that, and this is one of the things when it comes to your elections and your career, and that you're kind of down the middle. You're looking at both sides of these issues. When it comes to the national rhetoric on the Green New Deal, you've been outspoken as saying, hey, there are other things we can do where we can help the environment, but do so without all of those other economic mandates and job mandates and those kind of things.
Yeah, I would say, look, it's a very interesting phenomenon. I don't really disagree with anything in the Green New Deal that has to do with climate. It's the things like guaranteeing a job from the government, free college for everybody, even, my La Jolla neighbors and Donald Trump's kids. It doesn't make any sense. So what I've tried to do instead is saying, listen, we know we have to get to net zero carbon emissions by mid-century. What does that mean in terms of legislation? What are the things we have to pass? And I'm trying to identify those answers with my colleagues, by the way, both Democrats and Republicans, because to pass anything, it has to be bipartisan. I think Congress has lost a little muscle memory about bipartisan legislation, but we need to get that back.
How do you do that?
Well, slowly, I think, intentionally. I think I'm a Democrat. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I think my party's right on civil rights. We're right on economic opportunity. But I also have to understand that to get things done, I have to develop relationships with Republicans, and I have done that, and I'm friends with a lot of them. And we don't always see eye to eye, but we have a relationship where I can say, tell me how you'd react to this. Would this help you solve the problem? Can we find agreement? And frankly, guys, that's the hard thing about the job. The easy thing is to give a fiery speech to a bunch of people who agree with you. The hard thing, and I think what takes courage, is to go to the middle of the room, talk to someone you don't always agree with, and find agreement. One of those things I'm proud of that we passed the House is something I worked on, was co-sponsored by Mark Meadows, one of the most conservative Republicans in Congress. And he and I noticed that these big weather events are causing the federal government to spend a lot of money, and there was no accounting for what we were spending. So, as we're both concerned about that. That's not really a Republican and Democrat issue, and we don't have to, Mark Meadows doesn't have to agree on why this happened. I know it's because of climate change. But we passed the bill to deal with that and to improve our government processes. And that's the kind of thing, that progress we can make in a bipartisan way. But you can't pass anything with one party.